just check, we are streaming, we're on. All right, and we are online with our team's participants. Okay, good morning everyone. Good morning to day 2 of our summit on disinformation as a human rights threat. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are, those who are in the room in Gqeberha, South Africa, and those who are joining online from as far as Samoa. We've got participants from Denmark, Zambia, Malawi, Eswatini. You are all welcomed, and we stand on the protocols observed yesterday. Mine would be just to give a quick welcome and framing of what our discussions looked like yesterday and where we deep dived into some of the details unpacked by our in-person participants, but also those online. It was a very, very packed schedule, but some rich discussions emanated from our presentations. We had reflections from the chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission on how disinformation is certainly not a new thing, but it is packaged in a manner that one can actually reflect to the tactics used during the apartheid years. We were then very honored to have an address made by the Deputy Minister, Nell from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, echoing what the chairperson indicated, that certainly disinformation is, as it stands, a human rights threat, and it threatens the foundation of democracies such as ours. And Commissioner Professor Tsepo Madlingozi unpacked that into giving examples of the July unrest, Walter Sisulu concerns, and then just a general influx of matters reaching the South African Human Rights Commission, albeit through hate speech allegations, discrimination allegations, intimidation, and incitement matters. These land on our desks at the Commission, and it is then addressed through our complaints handling mechanisms. We were also honored and still honored today to have the NUNRI Executive Director, Mr. Gilbert Sebihogo, addressing the summit as representing the national human rights institutions of the continent, supporting this summit in respect of what we need to unpack here. The roles of national human rights institutions when it comes to developing technologies. Now, we were very honored in the subsequent sessions to have experts at the podium who addressed us on the details of disinformation or information integrity. And I would be not doing justice to any of their submissions, trying to unpack, but surely we will be including that in our summit report and summit commitments, because Mr. John Leroux from Graphica, the keynote speaker, Prof. Herman Wasserman from University of Stellenbosch, Tandy Smith, as well as Tina Power from Media Monitoring Africa and Alt Advisory, Jessie Can from the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change, as well as Nicole Fritz, representing freedom of expression, all provided us with a lot of insight on how do we unpack this to fit into what we as NHRIs understand as a human rights concern. Throughout these submissions, it was very clear from the Human Rights Commission side, and Professor Tsepo Madlingozi echoed that sentiment, that the Commission is clear on its position. We are not for censorship, but we have to unpack rights and interests in a balanced manner. And that, I certainly recall Ms. Fritz also unpacking that for us. We further also provided the panels and the participants online from other countries reflecting on the Paris principles and how this overarching duty of national human rights institutions globally provides us with a mandate that keeps up with the evolving nature of human rights violations, and that we need to reflect and go back to the core of the purpose of NHRIs. It is not we are not regulators, we are oversight. And how that then fits into this puzzle piece we want to build in terms of roles and responsibilities when it comes to developing technologies. We had such an insightful facilitated panel, facilitated by Hlengwe Dube from the University of Pretoria. We had Catherine Sutherland from Equal Education Law Center giving us insight on how the Bella Act was misconstrued in the messaging used through the popularization of social media and the messages there to create a distorted understanding of the purpose behind the Bella Act. We had Mutlatsi Komote from Code SA, Patiswa Magupeni from the South African Press Council, as well as Dr. Scott Simke from Research ICT, supported by Keegan Leach from Africa Check Online, unpacking what we understood to again be the details of this phenomenon. And the discussion, although we always see discussions after lunchtime to be quite difficult, all of us wanted this to carry on because it certainly evolves our understanding of the disinformation concept, how it affects our understanding in terms of the media, as well as fact-checking, and then also the understanding that we cannot fact-check certain things away, and what is our responsive mechanism then towards that. Now, today, we're going to take a little bit of another approach. We are very fortunate that we are joined online by most of our participants, and the nature of developing technologies allow us to provide the messaging that we are, as colleagues in the room, discussing also to participants around the globe, as I've indicated. Now today that's going to be emulated, and we will be starting with an address and a submission from Tsidi Maria, and she's online also to give us a little bit of a snapshot of her own experience from the media in the recent occurrence in the US, where Tsidi was also present. And we hope for a reflection from her side. And then I'm going to hand over to Mr. Jude Maturin. He is from the the Nelson Mandela University, to facilitate our next session. And that session, we will be asking Mr. Colin Mashile from the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, as well as Dr. Victor Shale from the Independent Electoral Commission, to join us here for a facilitated panel discussion. But we also have our participants online, very importantly, Commissioner Leonasia Leanne van der Merwe from the Commission for Gender Equality, and we will also be joined by Sibongile Baloy from the NPA. So these discussions will be again in a hybrid format, and after that we will break for tea. So mine is now to Zukiswa. Hand over to Tsidi. Tsidi, are you with us online?
I am. Am I coming through loud and clear?
Perfect. I'm handing over to Ms. Maria, and thank you so much for joining us. And after that, you will see Mr. Jude Maturin taking us through the next session. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I think on my and it's a really short input, really. As you mentioned, my name is Tsidi Madia. I'm a journalist by trade. I work at Eyewitness News. So in this situation, I'm a journalist. I'm on the radio. I head up a politics team at EWN. I also do a bit of online writing in my background. I've been a digital writer as well. So I've got a bit of an understanding of online and as well as broadcast as far as my role is concerned. And very much like you, our role from where I stand is really one that is empowered by the Constitution. From where I stand, we have a responsibility of making sure that we deliver credible information to citizens out in our country. Ours really, as I said, is to deliver credible information, to hold leaders accountable, and to a large degree, really, to inform and educate our nation. So what I'll do is share a couple of my observations in terms of our landscape, my experiences as well, to explain the impact of disinformation on the media as I understand it. So from where I stand, we are the fourth estate. So my biggest takeaway is that we are under extreme pressure. There's no question that when I look at the media landscape, we are under severe pressure. we are functioning with dwindling resources. And I'm sure everybody's heard from speakers who represent the media landscape about the impact of the juniorization of the newsroom, where you're losing people with institutional memories. And often when they hear information, it's almost like the first time they hear it. And they sometimes fall short of the checks and balances in the information. So that impact, that consequence in terms of what comes out, the output is very clear. It's a massive battle that we are dealing with. And I think one of the other big issues for me, from where I stand, is that we are a shrinking industry. It's a painful thing to admit, but we've shed at least half journalists over the past of journalists in the country over the past 10 years, if I'm correct. So it's difficult to sustain the model. We view ourselves as noble in our career, but we mostly operate in the private sector. You've got the SABC, the public broadcaster, but most of us aren't government funded, and its model not being sustained, advertising revenue not coming in, and as a result, you're watching our newspapers thinning out. Some are shutting down. As it stands, we have a couple of the legacy publications, I think City Press, Mail and Guardian, that are literally on the verge of turning off their lights. So it's a difficult era for us. And I think the other part is you're also trying to function in a sea of new media, in a sea of social media that is moving at a rapid pace, where we are constantly left trying to play catch up. And that's been part of our struggle. So that's in essence the backdrop really of my understanding of where we are. I think for us, or for where I stand, disinformation or misinformation for that matter, particularly disinformation, isn't something that stems from state organs. The United States is an anomaly. It is a really bizarre situation where you're seeing an institution, the state itself, being a perpetuator of disinformation. That's not necessarily the case. It's not what we easily see. And often you can make an argument that it's easy to direct people towards the right channels, the right information. But because things are moving at the pace that they are, and that we are playing catch up, a lie spreads definitely without question much faster. So we have a crisis, I think, on our hands because of that. Part of the US example that you're asking me to talk about, I mean, I'll be brutally honest, I was baffled by some of the line of questions I was getting from journalists in the United States. I mean, I understand that the media there is quite clear about where it stands. You know, you have blue or red. The US is highly polarized, so it's very difficult when you engage people to find anybody who's willing to be in the middle on anything. It's very rare in the US. So I knew that when you get some of the American journalists, or even just Americans, really, they will have a perception, and their truth is really based at large on what else is being said or where they politically are aligned. But I was baffled seeing journalists come at me without having done the research. I mean, I didn't expect the interview to go viral. I was actually embarrassed by the interview on News Nation. And I remember saying to my boss, I hope it never sees the light of day. Unfortunately, it went viral. But part of the difficulty for me, and I engaged the producers afterwards, and I said, my expectation as a journalist is that you've done some research, that you have some sense of what the truth is, and you're not going to carry a message that's been perpetuated by your leadership that's actually in the wrong. That's part of the struggle. I found it highly disappointing. And I said, I think South Africa is a large democracy, and South African journalists understand that you can have robust negotiations, debates, conversations. We all for it, because that's our backdrop. But at least have some semblance of that. Our own newsrooms are still struggling with trying to position, how do you tell the story where you all recognize that there is no genocide in our country. So what you sometimes see is journalists writing, government says there's no genocide. And then you're like, but wait a minute, guys. As yourself position it that way. If I say to you the sky is purple, are you going to say, TD says the sky is purple? Are you going to get outside and look and make a determination, inform your audience based on what you understand to be reality? So even the phrasing became a difficult point. And because of the issue of generalization, you find yourselves having to say to your team, at least on my end, saying, guys, they're basic truths. And we're not going to say basic truths are a government perspective. You are able to tell, you're the authority in the moment. So all those things also get compromised in all of this. And that's the confusion, I think, that's allowed for disinformation to fester the way that it has, is that because of the juniorization, because of the pressures, picking and prodding at it, it becomes even difficult. And because we're moving at the pace that we are, because it's so much happens in our country, at least in the South African example, we have breaking news at literally neck-breaking speed. I mean, there's no reprieve in this country. So what you find is people are competing to get to the headlines. And because you haven't had time to nurture enough, that's where it also allows for things like disinformation and how things are phrased to thrive. So there is a need, but I'll talk about what I think are solutions a little bit later on. There is a need to try and look at that a little bit. Going back to social media, I think it is, without question, has absolutely managed to muddy the waters. It's not regulated. It is a rapid. Users, funny enough, when you see it on TikTok, actually mix a pinch of the truth with a lie, and that's how they thrive. I mean, how did the Dr. Matthew Lani phenomenon happen? Where somebody is a fake doctor, is dispensing medication and advice, and is actually selling it. In part, was taking bits and pieces of things that we know to be true and posturing that and presenting that as part of his case. So there's a really horribly gray area between opining and sharing of actual information. He put on a pair of stethoscopes and people literally fell for it. It took a really long time to figure out what is the truth. I mean, to date, the Matthew Lani matter still remains. And what was really odd, going back to journalists, also failing to remember what the truth is in the moment, is even after he'd been exposed as not a doctor, at a media briefing, people saying Dr. Matthew. And I was like, why are journalists saying Dr. Matthew? We know he's not. So the truth gets lost in the noise of social media. And it's really hard to track, as I said, when a lie emerges, it spreads incredibly fast. The capacity to chase what goes viral is simply lacking. The tools to try and correct, I heard you mention Africa Check. It is an important platform. I know we lean on it, particularly around elections, but you don't have enough instruments that chase and fact check. I think what we tried to do, and again, the American example, as Donald Trump was speaking in that engagement while we were in the Oval Office, I know that here my team was quickly searching, is this photograph really in South Africa or is it in the Congo? What happened? And I remember Orange saying, I've got a video of where those crosses are. So the speed that is required to demystify something is simply not there. We are found wanting. As I said, we have avenues that try, but again, the instruments are still very much wanting. I also think that we haven't fully figured out who we are catering to as the media. Part of why I think disinformation does really well is it's figured out who it's speaking to. The ability to go viral suggests that you know how to reach out to people and to appeal to them, that your content spreads. You still find incredibly long form, and I have nothing against the art of long form journalism. It's very important. But sometimes if you are writing and you're writing to, and you're covering a story to appease yourself or to speak to what you know in your constituency, you lose sight of why you are there. How we saw it, for instance, is covering some stories. You go and you put in a lot of resources as a team. And when you look at the amount of engagement with the content, you realize that people aren't interested. People want to know if it's a 3-minute read versus a 15-minute read. People want to move on very quickly. The avenues that are spreading disinformation are doing it in short and succinct platforms, videos and the likes. And that, unfortunately, is what's appealing to people. That's what the audience, as of late, are consuming. And I don't know if the media is fully aligned with that, is fully aware of what to do. And again, as I said, things that go viral are very difficult to go back and chase and to try and reset and to demystify. In terms of the solutions, on my end, I always think there's got to be a balance between going back to the basics. So what are the basics? What are the questions that you should be asking? The basic tenets of how do you tell a story? How do you ask questions? Why are you at a story? And what is the aim of it all? When you're holding leaders accountable, what do you need to know? That the audience, what does the audience actually need to know? Why are you here? And then I think while you go back to the basics, you need to figure out how to adapt that to new media. What's also been interesting, if you watch the P. Diddy trial, which you couldn't watch, but you followed particular journalists to understand what was happening in the court, a lot of the American journalists adapted to TikTok, to new media, and they utilized it brilliantly, where you get a blow-by-blow based on transcripts. And those who made headlines, global headlines, are those who figured out how to tell us that story in, I think, an informal manner, because people also want that. They want you to speak their language. They don't want to feel that it's uppity, because that also allows you to be able to be a messenger, because that's part of also what I recognize now, that the message matters almost as much as the messenger. So you need to go back to the basics. You need to adapt to the current trends on social media. But a part of that is recognizing the value of the messenger. It's not just the message anymore. I do explainers sometimes to go beyond the political story that's happened. And we always marvel at, again, the amount of views they garner. And it's simply because I'm having a conversation with the listeners. I'm telling them what's happened, but in their language, at their level, and it works. It's one of those things that we need to think about as we try and figure out how do you manage and how do you wade your waters through this period of disinformation. And I think lastly for me, it has to also go back to partnerships. It is important to open the door, keep the doors open with organizations, with government, around what are you working on, what are the issues you're concerned about, what are you trying to get across to audiences, because that's also how you figure out how to repackage information and counter the sea that exists, that spreads and allows for disinformation to thrive. That's in essence really my general thoughts on and experiences as far as disinformation is concerned. It's bewildering, but it is a very real thing that, as many have said, it's not new, but we are playing catch up. We're not adapting fast enough. And that's a crisis in and of itself for the media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. This very insightful, and I think for us in the room as well, reliving that viral interview of you standing on behalf of South Africans in your space. It was really commendable, and we commend you for that, bringing the truth to the international platforms as well. I think what resonates with me is, again, what we're saying is the evolution of what the messages and the messaging, and perhaps even the messenger, in terms of information looks like, and how do we apply that so that we can make sure that what we provide and what we send out to members of the public is in fact correct, and in reflecting from the Human Rights Commission's side, is in line with the Bill of Rights, is in line with the duties of us as oversight, because at the end of the day, we are the recipients of when the violations occur on the ground, and if we can catch it at messages and messenger stage, that's certainly something we have to consider. Thank you so much for joining us online, and we will now be continuing our program. Jude, if I can invite you to the podium. We again say thank you to all of our participants online. This session will be hybrid in format. Please do indulge us. The hybrid nature does sometimes come with one or two technical concerns, but we will be sorting them out as we proceed. So, Jude, thank you so much for joining us and facilitating this next session.
Thank you so much, Eileen, and thank you for your invitation to attend this all-important summit. So I'd like to start with a few opening remarks based on what we were discussing yesterday. I am a lecturer in media and communication at Nelson Mandela University, and for the last 6 years, the approach and focus that we've had in our courses and programs is to prepare students for this challenging new environment of what happens when your communication space is digital, hybrid, networked, decentralized, and everything that you took for granted is up for grabs. This information has been identified obviously as one of the key existential risks to our social existence. It's a risk to development, it's a risk to individual development, it's a risk to our economies. Today we'll have representatives from the IEC, the Center for Gender Equality, the Department of Communication and Technology, and the Department of Public Prosecutions, And we're going to look at their experiences and the vital role that each plays in the shaping of our information space. Quite interestingly, I know that the summit is called Summit Around Disinformation. I know that the words information integrity has been referred to, which is almost a more positive framing of what we need to be aiming for, Patiswa. So maybe that's what we should be doing first of all. We were talking about naming things as they should be yesterday. So maybe we should be naming things as they should be and focusing on the environment that we should be hoping for. As it indicated, we live in what many call a knowledge society, but the society is hybrid, uneven, is fragmentary. The digital age has transformed how information flows, and with it, who gets to shape the public mind at scale and at speed. But the technologies themselves, Patiswa, they're not neutral. They aren't. The Facebooks aren't neutral. Any technology, whether it's a piece of hardware or software, are influenced by design. They're influenced by power. They're influenced by wealth. And they're influenced within the context in which very often they are created. So global regulation of the super platforms is having a massive impact on the communication and cultural spaces of the world, in particular the global south, which tends to be marginalized in its space at the governance table. So we have to fight for spaces at the table. We also have to fight for alliances where we are able to have our voices heard. One of the figures that I very often share at conferences is I show the share of revenue for Facebook from different parts of the world, the share of Facebook from the US and European markets, and then the share of Facebook's revenue from the Middle East, Africa, and the rest. And when you look at that, you'll actually see in your own minds, you'll start to see a correlation between where companies like Meta prioritize their efforts, their governance, their outreach, and why, for example, because this agglomeration of smaller countries with huge populations, let's be quite clear on that are in the majority world, get marginalized because they contribute a smaller share of wealth to shareholders. So we need to be aware of these. We need to be aware where international laws intersect and affect our own local situations and standings. Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act on the US was really about promoting, once again, like the AI executive order for Trump, it was really about promoting US interests in internet development and innovation. But it did this at the expense of writing a blank check to US internet-based companies, saying, well, we'll excuse you from having to engage in moderation and being burdened by lawsuits because you're simply regarded as a carrier. But this means that when their tools go mad, I think as Jean was telling me this morning, when Grok goes mad and upranks posts or starts talking about white Afrikaner genocide or fomenting harm against women journalists and activists, or these tools are used for cyberbullying, that there are implications and these organizations and corporates must be held accountable. When the guardrails for AI development can be removed by a single executive order, creating existential global risks in an AI arms race between East and West, which is how it's being couched, we need to get there ahead of China. Essentially what you're not seeing is this is a race for ascendancy in the capitalist economic and political order. Who will be on top of the pile in terms of political power and also economic power? Whose companies will rule? And the implications for the world in terms of information health, in terms of the ecology, plays second fiddle. In the past, traditional media operated under local regulation, journalistic ethics, public interest mandates. It was flawed, yes, but it was also accountable in part, at the very least, locally, due to entities like our press councils, our BCSA, institutional codes of conduct and practice, procedural checks and balances. And the challenge we see today is that center of gravity has shifted. Information is produced and shared by decentralized users, which is great, so that we have freedom of expression devolved at the level of the individual. But the incentives, Dr. Scott, the incentives are part of the problematic aspect of this, because the platforms owned by global tech giants incentivize content creation for engagement, not for truth. And influencers who are essentially, and I want to use these keywords here, influencers are essentially paid performers in a pyramid scheme. Influencers are paid performance. It is performance. Someone was saying Matthew Lani just puts on something that says, I'm a doctor. It's performance. And it's a pyramid scheme. So many of my young communication students who years ago would come into the space aspiring to be communicators in public interest now want to be the next Matthew Lani as a path to instant riches. I see this written about all the time. Platforms like Meta, TikTok, X, and ironically, the platform called Truth do not prioritize truth. They prioritize engagement, they prioritize profit, they prioritize power, and they do this by picking out our worst excesses of our human emotions, outrage, fear. The algorithms reward virality, outrage, and polarization. And because that these platforms are also governed from abroad, we find ourselves regulated by commercial entities answerable not to democratic publics, but to shareholders and advertisers. This is not just a shift in content, it's a shift in global power from public to private, from local to global, from transparent to opaque, because once again, these tools, as a consequence of how intellectual property works, are black boxes that we aren't allowed to look into, and are becoming increasingly difficult to be able to look into as a consequence of the opacity and our access to data, particularly from South Africa, so from the global South perspective. So researchers are finding it increasingly difficult to be able to access data from APIs that used to be available and open. So this requires that we look at different sophisticated approaches to policy. So I speak about that today, to education, so we need those people in the room, Eileen, to lobbying, to fact-checking. We can't fact-check our way out of fascism, as Dr. Scott said, but it is still a requirement, and we need the fact-checkers. We need collaborations. We need research. We need governance. And we need to do this mindful of ensuring not just controls and protections, because the challenge in the global South is where we simply say that there's something we should fear, and we have policies that then clamp down on freedom of expression. We have situations like we've had, for example, in spaces like Kenya, where as a result of the consequences of the damages that we see, we can essentially have authoritarianism creeping and stepping in. So that becomes a major challenge. And making sure that this is concerned. We need collaborations, we need governance to ensure freedom of expression. We need to shift our communication environments to educate communicators for moderation. Where there is no moderation and there's no attempt to balance conversations for fear of people being doxxed or trolled. But I think that there is a space, Eileen, for essential communication, education for communicators in the space of attempting to reoccupy the space with a set of knowledges and strategies to be able to counter harmful speech. And yes, there is a point that material that encourages outrage spreads faster. In fact, I think the figures from MIT if I stand on a correction, I think it's 6 times faster. And then when corrections happen, corrections seldom have the same impact. But there needs to be a correction. Someone has got to stand in the breach. And for that, it means rejigging and rethinking about your communication environments. Disinformation is not merely misinformation, it's the weaponization of narrative. It can destabilize elections, silence dissent, fuel gender-based abuse, and erode trust in our institutions like our electoral systems, and even our educational policy like we heard yesterday. It's not a glitch in the system, it's actually a feature of the attention economy and of these companies. And as the Global South, we need to fight back, so I'm glad that there are entities online as well, human rights entities that are following these. Resolution 620 of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, I'm glad that we have the Special Rapporteur that will be with us this afternoon, states that we need to control African narratives and data flows, whether gathered by state or foreign tech companies. We need access to that data because it is ours. We have both the right and responsibility to ensure that our information systems serve democracy, development, and dignity, not division, dependence, and domination. And so the stakes are high. Information risks are not abstract. From yesterday, we've seen they're gendered, they're racialized, and they're also generational. And during elections, as we will have next year, the stakes are even higher. Disinformation doesn't just distort debates, it can delegitimize democratic outcomes, as we've seen even in the US. And that's why the Commission for Gender Equality, the Department of Public Prosecutions, and the Department of Communications and Digital Technology, and the IEC are here this morning. You represent institutions that are responsible for public trust, whether through law or policy or public service. And so in this session, I'd like to ask our colleagues that are here to come to the front, and we'll engage with a series of questions to look at what your experiences are and how we can address these issues. Yesterday we spoke mainly to NGOs and civil society organizations, and today we're speaking to governments. So good morning, and if you could please take your seat. Cluster and come closer. I won't bite. All right, so that was a vicious mic drop. So the time is 9:50. We have until 11. Okay, so we have a lot of time to discuss. I'd like us to spend 5 minutes with each organization, just talking about your institutions, its ambit, what it does, its role in South African society, and what was the most significant way that disinformation has impacted your department or your area or your field in the last, say, 10 years?
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, everyone in the room and online. My name is Colin Dimagatsomashile. I work for the Department of Digital Technology, the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, responsible for broadcasting policy. So from the department side, we are responsible for sort of audio-visual media and online safety issues. And we are governed by first of all, the Constitution. Our role is to protect the constitutional principles that are there. That will be all those related to human rights and others. And we have policies like the Electronic Communications Act that deals with broadcasting and telecommunications and electronic commerce. and we also have the Films and Publications Amendment, Films and Publications Board that deals with matters related to classification and the registration of all the commercial online services happens with them. Your Google, Netflix, and all of those, Apple and others will have to register with them when they operate in South Africa. We also have the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act that has oversight over the ISPs that will be usually responsible for taking down content and other small ISPs to a large extent, and they are also recognized in terms of self-regulation. And we also have the ECA and the ICASA Act. ICASA, as you correctly said, is responsible for the broadcasting sector, and it has oversight over some of the pluralism, content issues, and human rights protection related to gender and all these other issues in the traditional media. So over the years, we have been observing the development around the digital technologies and the online environment. And from the side of government, we amended the Films and Publications Act so that it responds to the online environment. And one of the issues that was raised when we were amending it was that we were doing censorship. I think those that were opposed to regulation, and they said we were doing, or else we were trying to correct certain matters so that there is a clear regulatory policy framework in terms of what should happen to the emergence of these new commercial online distributors that were not paying the fees to the FPB of registration like others were doing, also to deal with revenge pornography and strengthening the online protection of children. Then ICASA has been dealing with elections, monitoring the elections and other issues, but because it's a Section 192 institution, it's one of those that have the explicit right to protect the freedom of expression, either through the licensing where you have diverse voices that are there, and through its monitoring report, it will say what is it that is happening in the sector. Even the FPB, through its report, it will say whether there is things that are happening that are not protecting the human rights. So currently we are finalizing an audio and audiovisual media services and online content safety draft white paper for public comment. The intention is that we had recognized that there was no regulatory parity. The traditional broadcasters were being regulated. The online services, you have video sharing platforms, very large online platforms, and other services that were coming into South Africa, carrying the content and other issues that we are dealing with today, were not being regulated. So for proper implementation and oversight, you require a regulatory or a policy framework so that people know where they belong and who has to do what and who has to deal with certain issues. So you'll have now all of these services falling within a regulatory framework. They'll have to either register or notify about the regulator about their existence in South Africa, so that when there are complaints around all a manager in the country that will be taking the complaints and reporting in terms of how the complaints of people have been taken up and being dealt with, so that at least South Africans and everyone knows where to go. But I guess the key issues that is driving us now is that, as you know, that the regulatory and the policy developments have been taking time over the 10 years, as we were saying. Our approach, like any other, has been from a risk-based perspective. And in terms of the misinformation, for us, it is going to be misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and all those issues related to online hate, deepfakes, and other issues. So we are taking a risk-based approach to them. and also that strong human rights perspective, because our constitution says that in whatever we do, when we protect the freedom of speech, freedom of expression and others, we must be within the constitutional realms, and we must avoid chilling effects that will do that in your way trying to make policy, only to find that you have this, you are becoming a censor or you are limiting speech. So in relation to misinformation and disinformation, what, as we were mentioned in GCIS, during the COVID, we had sort of a working group, project management, where we had GCIS, broadcasters, and some of the online digital platforms, where we had a working group on misinformation and disinformation and the NGO sector. And we were trying to work together so that we deal with the issues that will emerge around misinformation, around health, COVID, and other issues. But moving forward, we report to the Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies in the National Assembly and the Select Committee in the NCOP. So they have been asking us questions to say, what is South African approach or strategy towards disinformation, misinformation? From our side, we believe that, as you correctly said as well, based on the principles that we adopted from the ITU, that called Regulation 5.0, that this should be a collaborative effort. We have moved from a top-down approach where we say the policy or the strategy that we are going to develop, it has to involve these services, the digital services platforms. It has to include all the people that are in this room, and that's why one was here, because one identified this as key stakeholders. It has to include the Chapter 9 institutions. It has to include the regulators. It has to include fact checkers. It has to include academics. It has to include researchers. That collaborative effort, so that each play their role from different, and it will also include government departments. From our government department, it will be DERCO, it will be GCIS, it will be DTIC and others, so that when we develop this strategy, we start as a collective at the beginning, so that at the end, when we finish, at least the implementation becomes easier, because we will have carried everyone along. So the implementation is also very, very critical. But the risk analysis, where you are going to look at the societal, technological, economic, environmental, and the political, is going to be very critical from a risk perspective of developing this policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I suppose I should maybe summarize later with sort of key takeaways. But the one takeaway that I had from that was that policy development is an inclusive process, and that the necessity for balancing constitutional rights of access to information and freedom of expression with new risks and harms is something that must be carefully considered and weighed and evaluated in the light of its impact on our democracies and our freedoms. It's not just something that we take for granted and we attempt to regulate because there's a harm and eventually regulate ourselves into a corner. I'm going to pose the same question. I'm going to pose the same question to, I don't know, do we have online? So do we have CGE online? All right. So I'm going to pose the same question to Commissioner Leanne van der Merwe from the Commission for Gender Equality. And that question, ma'am, in so 5 to 10 minutes to provide a summary of the kind of work and contributions of the CGE and the kind of chief challenges that the Commission has recognized around the impact of disinformation on gender equality in South Africa over the last decade, so we can contextualize this discussion. I see that I will quickly move on to the IEC.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me convey the Commission's appreciation for being invited to this important discussion. As indicated, my name is Victor Shale. I'm the GM in the Office of the CEO of the Electoral Commission, and I work mainly on Commission legacy projects. So, if one looks back at the discussions since yesterday, there's been a lot of reference to how disinformation impacts elections. Maybe just as an entry point for me to state the obvious, just a few points. One being that we all are aware that the country's political transition has matured over the 30-year period. In fact, last year, one of the bigger milestones in as far as we are concerned as a commission was that we conducted the 2024 national and provincial elections at the point when the country was marking the 30 years of democracy. Secondly, is that multi-party politics are more entrenched in South Africa. In fact, I always say to audiences when I have an opportunity like this to say, just like the discourse around the Arab Spring some years ago, where I was one of those Pan-African scholars who argued that there was nothing Arab Spring about that development. In our view, this was just a delayed political transitions for our Northern African brothers. So what you are seeing emerging at this juncture again in South Africa should not surprise us. It's just really a delayed manifestation of what politics have become on the continent. So you see heightened competition within and among political actors, political parties in the country. There's an almost now emerging throat-cutting competition for public office. Our politics and indeed our electoral processes are becoming more complex. And there's an increased number of political parties and candidates. Just to give you an idea, if you were to look at political parties registered for the national and local level, there's over 600 already. In 2009, for the national and provincial elections, we had 117 political parties. And out of those 117, 40 political parties contested the elections in 2009. Fast track to 2024, we had 381 political parties that were registered, and out of those, 70 actually took part in the last elections. And there were 11 independents after all that trauma we had to go through. Now, I was happy to hear, I think it was Prof. Matlingozo, or the chairperson, I can't remember, who indicated that the reality is that disinformation does not only happen online. In fact, I would add that disinformation has always existed, at least in as far as we are concerned. It has always existed. It's just that it is now escalated, given that the digital platforms give it more oxygen. So we have witnessed, as the electoral management body, disinformation in communities, which then obviously impacts on the rights of the citizens to participate in elections. I'll give you very simple examples, but that then indicate the kind of struggles we have. You will be aware that the Electoral Commission depends on government infrastructure and private infrastructure for voting stations. And we're battling to move away from temporary structures like tents, because as you know, election time in our country is also a protest time. So it becomes very difficult to organize elections using those structures. They get banned, they get stolen, and all manner of things. So because of this information, you find that there are certain education establishments who will flatly refuse to let us use their infrastructure. They will refuse to give us access to their schools, or they will agree. Some of them even will sign lease agreements only to lock their gates on the day of the elections. These are as a result of this information, where maybe a word will go around that a particular civic organization or political party is going to demonstrate and torch the schools and those kind of things. Even in churches, this information is rife in churches. This information is rife within political parties. In fact, ironically, we just had a symposium on political finance in Durban a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago or so. And one of the strongest criticisms by the political parties was that the Electoral Commission is not doing enough on civic and voter education. So you have the same actors who spectacularly ensure that people stay away from the polls, accusing us of failing to do outreach. So these are some of the challenges that we have. And I was just saying, our ability to ensure that citizens get registered, that they actually turn out on the day, is militated by the level of disinformation in communities and all the other social spaces. Now, we have already alluded yesterday to the impact of deepfakes in electoral processes, where they are used to falsify electoral events and impersonate or create non-existent characters. So, in short, Chair, all forms of, narratives that can be characterized as misinformation or disinformation at the end of the day have a direct impact on the citizens' rights to participate. In other words, the realization of the rights, especially those contained in Section 19 of the Constitution, get impaired by this information. Now, some of the responses that we've had to put in place as the Commission, I'll just quickly run through those. Part of our responses is investing in social media resources. Here I'm talking about our attempts to expand our institutional capabilities to engage through engaging specialists and putting in place call centers to deal with, first to identify disinformation and to assist us in responding to that. Then we also have monitoring where again we have invested in capabilities to monitor what goes on the different digital platforms. Then we also have public awareness campaigns where we educate voters on the risks entailed or imposed by disinformation, and also encouraging them to verify information as they receive it. So we really go out quite a lot at schools, in communities, and also through our communication channels. And we also engage a lot through the public and community radio stations and the television networks. One of the strategies we've used and which has really served us well up to this point is collaboration with the tech companies themselves. Meta, Google, Microsoft, TikTok. I can't speak about the other one. We have not been successful to reach X. But our collaboration with them has led to having an agreement with them, kind of an MOU, and we worked with our colleagues from Media Monitoring Africa in this regard, and they've been quite helpful in ensuring that there's a rapprochement between the Commission and the tech companies, so that we can then be able to respond timeously when there are threats to the electoral process. We've also collaborated with broader civil society on a number of awareness campaigns and partnerships, for instance, with the likes of SANEF, the Press Council also, because we've had to also dedicate a lot of time in also reaching bilaterally to the media houses, because a lot of this information also thrives when there is no factual data available to combat this. And I think for us, we have, if you look at our documents on our website or any IEC communication, you'll find that we always provide as much data as possible. That for us has really helped. You will recall that, for instance, one of the political parties accused us of having stolen about 9 million of their votes in the last elections. That story didn't hold, because there's ample evidence out there, data, that people could use. So we always find it easy when we then deal with the media to make sure that we provide them as much information as possible, so that when the reporters go out there, they are also armed with enough information to deal with. So those are some of the interventions that we've had.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, I was well aware of the work that you guys have done with MMA, the Real 411 campaign. In fact, you answered a lot of what I was going to ask for the second question, which I'll eventually pose to you, which is what kinds of collaborations are you engaging with? But I first want to speak to our colleagues at the CGE and the Director for Public Prosecutions about their particular experience. So let's see if we can go on to Teams and see if the Commissioner, Leonasia Jan van der Merwe, is available.
A very good morning to all of you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, thank you. Again, colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on disinformation within the context of gender identity and gender diversity. As introduced, I'm Commissioner van der Merwe. I am a part-time commissioner a National Commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality. I'm deployed to the Eastern Cape Province. I'm really excited about the opportunity to share our perspective this morning. There have been, sorry about my voice, I'm nursing a cold. There are academics based in the North who have been writing on transgender lives and transgender identities and relegating them to non-existence almost. Some of that has now come onto the African continent, and what we have been trying to combat is to ensure that this doesn't make its way into policy. Sadly, we've seen that become operationalized through policies, as we've seen the Trump administration cutting its funding in South Africa, particularly for sexual and gender minorities, such as the LGBT community and transgender women in particular. So in South Africa and globally, debates on gender ideology have been weaponized to spread fear, spread misinformation and hate, and to create panic, particularly against transgender, non-binary and gender diverse people. And I really want to stress that disinformation is not just about factual inaccuracy. These are narratives that are deliberately created to spread false information and false narrative. And some of these we've seen manifest in narratives such as transgender identities being a modern intervention, although the evidence tells us that it goes way back, as we've seen gender reassignment surgeries documented at Groote Schuur Hospital since the 1970s. They've also, some of what these so-called trans-exclusionary radical feminists have positioned gender-affirming healthcare as mutilation, that it is harmful and that it is experimental, which is really contrary to what we've seen in the body of evidence. Also, that teaching about gender diversity confuses children, or that it undermines the structures of families. These narratives erase the scientific consensus. They disregard lived experiences, and they create moral panic rather than an informed discussion. Its impact on human rights is that disinformation about gender fuels stigma, hate crimes, and exclusion. We've seen this in the outright rejection of transgender healthcare rights. We've also seen it in the rising number of cases, of violence against LGBTQI plus persons. Currently, the CGE is in court alongside the Human Rights Commission in a case of a Gqeberha-based businessman who put a sign in his shop that said LGBTQ persons are not welcome in the shop. Further to that, there was a WhatsApp group that had spread the most vile messages. And that's also, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you. Do continue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So this disinformation undermines the right to dignity, quality, education, health, and safety. Rights, but disinformation threatens these gains, often targeting vulnerable communities, for example, transgender youth. Information comes from many different sources, as we've heard yesterday. Even though disinformation in the current context has primarily been fueled by the media, social media, international media, and how all of that gets consumed, we need to also recognize that there's a platform in academia where I have done most of the contestations with people who write these journal articles, and it's definitely, disinformation is not new. I think social media and current forms of media have just made it really, it's just enabled it to move at a faster pace. But certainly we've seen in academia that, writing and crafting of disinformation is really not something new. Rather, it's amplified by social media algorithms imported from international anti-gender movements, sometimes disguised as a concern for the family, the Christian family, or child protection. It's very crucial that we distinguish between legitimate debate and malicious disinformation campaigns that sow division in the movement. So I want to express a call to action for all of us to take a rights-based approach to addressing information, including that includes gender diversity, holding platforms accountable for harmful content, supporting fact-based public education on gender identity and hate. At its very core, combating disinformation on gender is about defending truth, dignity, and inclusion for all, regardless of how they identify. Just to say in closing that if we allow falsehoods to shape our policies and attitudes, we fail the promise of democracy. The truth is not threatening, ignorant, and facilitated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Commissioner. We're going to move very quickly on to the Department of Public Prosecutions, and Sibongile Baloyi, is she online?
Good morning to all esteemed guests and everyone in attendance. I am online.
That's great. So I'm going to repeat the same question that we gave to our other participants, which is a quick introduction to the ambit of your work and what kinds of trends have you seen within the disinformation space that are impacting on the DSP over, say, the last decade.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Bongile Baloyi, and I am working as the Digital Communications Manager for the NPA. And I will be speaking on the misinformation trends that we've seen on our social media platforms as the NPA. Recently, we've dealt with various cases of misinformation on social media where false allegations and imminent arrest claims are made against high-profile individuals These claims are often part of a larger disinformation campaign, and when they go viral, they often lead to harassment of our prosecutors and leadership. And these cases don't necessarily translate to actual court cases, but they remain as part of a larger misinformation campaign that is circulating on social media. And lately we've had a case, I think it was the day before yesterday, where one of political figures, a social media, specifically on Twitter, a post, it was circulating under the NPA, but this was fake content that said we've provisionally withdrawn charges against this person. So these are the kind of trends that we've witnessed on our social media platforms. And as part of our response to the trends of disinformation, as the NPA, we have put together a rapid response team that is assessing, verifying, and responding swiftly to these emerging trends that we are witnessing on our platforms. And this also enables our prosecutors, our spokespeople, and the digital team to align on messaging and to be able to respond swiftly and accurately. And the rapid response team is made up of senior managers, media relations, legal, and digital. And this team assists the organization to fact-check alerts in response to virus claims. We are also using our digital platforms to educate people on often misunderstood concepts such as bail and prosecutorial processes. And where this content warrants a response from the NPA, we often issue clarifying statements within hours of noticing these trends. We have also implemented a real-time media monitoring system where we assess media coverage, we check for social media mentions and influencer commentary and hashtags related to the NPA and the broader justice cluster. This assists in identifying harmful narratives and coordinated attacks early to guide our communication and our responses. As I conclude, these cases of disinformation that fall outside the scope of communication, especially those that may involve legal breaches, these cases are often referred to our Legal Affairs Department, which provides guidance and escalates matters for legal recourse. The Rapid Response Team has a representative from the Legal Affairs Department. This ensures that we have the appropriate legal processes without overstepping the boundaries of our communication function. In this way, our response to disinformation is collaborative, responsible, and within the legal and ethical protocols. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
They lost me. Oh, sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have too much time left, but I'd like to throw a question out to the CGE, the NPA, and also to the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies. Since Victor, you so eloquently handled and discussed the collaborations that you guys have had with other entities, both governmental, non-governmental, and also around the platforms. So I'd like to throw this question first to to Colin. What collaborations does DCT have with other entities, both governmental, non-governmental, and platform, around the issues of disinformation? And in particular, one of the things I'd like to focus on is, do any of the entities have a policy and approach to countering, to counter disinformation narratives. So in other words, approaches that, for example, where you've got the Director of Public Prosecutions, indicating that they'd be utilizing legal means to utilize approaches that attempt to inject communication into the space to counter harmful narratives. So those two questions: one, collaboration, and two, what approaches to counter disinformation narratives is being explored by the entities here today.
In terms of the collaborations, I think our peers at the GCIS continuously would be engaging with the OTTs or what we call the OTTs, and with the media monitoring group and fact checkers for their communications issues. But from our side, we are encouraged, and that's the other reason one is here. We are encouraged by the ICT Regulators Forum, where you have information regulator, ICASA, FPB. I think the Competition Commission will come, and the .ZEDNA that deals with domain names. But I think my point, the point that I was going to raise for collaboration is that at that forum, we are missing out the human rights perspective, where you do not have the Gender Commission to raise gender issues and all of those issues related to misogyny and other issues. You don't have the Human Rights Commission to say, how do we incorporate human rights issues? Because when we develop our policies, you have an element to say, how is it going to affect the human rights in terms of the cabinet memoranda and your socio-economic impact assessment. So that's where I think the human rights element can be coming in to say this policy is going to affect that. But as I indicated to you, there is no formal strategy that the government has approved or developed where all the people that are going to be affected and requiring the involvement of these digital platforms where we have to, and that's what I was saying, that the question that has been coming from Parliament is that we need to develop such strategy like other countries. But when we go to, let's say, G20 forums, to the UN, to the ITU, I think there is general agreement amongst the leaders that they support the development of the digital technologies, but how it has developed in terms of what misinformation, deepfakes, and others could do, it requires sort of a proper drafted governance and oversight. And from our side, what it means, you require legislative policy framework where you are going to deal with definitions. It is not like there is a common agreement in terms of what should be the definition of disinformation, malinformation. That's where we are going to agree. And that has to be agreed to even with justice and all of those partners. So what we have acknowledged is that there's no way that this can be done by us alone. It is purely a collaborative effort. And for it to work, you require all the players in the value chain to be part of the framework. And what we might find at the end, you will decide whether you do guidelines or code of conduct based on the capabilities or the resources that you do have. But what we are not going to do is to develop policy for its own sake. We want an implementable policy that will make the difference, so that Human Rights Commission will come in at the point that it has to come in, the fact checkers will have to come in, the policy, the regulators, but the collaboration, I think that's what we are calling for, collaboration to produce such a strategy.
Okay, so that was the view of the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies. I'm hoping that there was an invitation to the CGE, and Commissioner, I'm going to ask you to speak next, but I hope there was an invitation to the CGE and the Human Rights Commission to join the ICT Regulatory Forum, or Regulator Forum, to ensure that those interventions are also included as part of the work that they are doing. But if we can please go back to Teams, I'd like to pose that question then to the Commission for Gender Equality as well. What are the measures of the collaborations that you are presently having with entities in this space around these issues?
Good morning once again. Can you hear me?
Indeed. Yes, we can indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Yes, the CGE has various partners that we work with. I think we also have an established department that is called the Unit on Public Education and Information, whose job it is to implement the public education mandate of the organization. So in this regard, the CGE works with a lot of smaller civil society organizations, or rather we ensure that we bring information to some of these smaller organizations, some of these smaller entities that we work with. One such example is our work with the advice centers through our public education mandate in terms of just responding to narratives. The CGE has also come in as amicus on the case on the Lagadi matter, because I feel like a lot of that is fueled also by disinformation, particularly around the WhatsApp group that they now claim is dismantled. But our stance is that at one point, that WhatsApp group did exist, and it did fuel a lot of disinformation regarding sexual and gender minorities around PE. And I think that is going to have, a national precedence for the spread of this kind of information. So yeah, litigation we've also done as an intervention, and we've worked alongside other organizations to respond to some of the disinformation that is out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. So Sibongile, on behalf of the Department of Public Prosecutions, same question. What kind of collaborations does your organization enter in with different kinds of civil society organizations, community organizations, other governmental organizations? And the second question, which I think I just wanted some information on, is have you experimented, have you guys got any work with counter disinformation narrative campaigns? Bongili, are you there? I think your mic might need to be, is a mic still muted? I can't see from here. While we're waiting for Sibongile, and we have a couple of minutes, just a quick question to everyone here, which is, are you on TikTok, both at a personal level and then at an institutional level? I mention this as a really important question because we're a young nation. I work with young people, and I know the most recent social media statistics show how both young people and people in older generations are glued to TikTok. It's our fastest growing platform, and it's the one that people are spending the most time on. So I just want to know, what's the approach or strategy? One, are you personally on TikTok? And then two, from an institutional point of view, are you utilizing this as a tool? Going back to that last question around counter disinformation approaches, which I'm not sure if it's something that's actually being tried and attempted, and to what degree by various entities.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can confirm that the Electoral Commission does have the TikTok account and effectively uses it. Personally, I have it, but I hardly use it. I think I just get sidetracked by other things. But yes, that we have, and I think it's one of, it's just that I can't recall off my head, but we have also in our reports even demonstrated how effectively we have used it and the statistics there to show how it has aided our voter registration and polling as well. So I can confirm that. But maybe just Chair, to one point in case you are winding up, I didn't mention, which I think is important for the collaborations question, and that has to do with the Commission's work around developing principles and guidelines for the use of digital and social media. We have developed these principles and guidelines under the auspices of the Association of African Election Authorities. And so that's a partnership we are establishing at a continental level. But the importance of that instrument is also that the principles and guidelines are human rights based. Secondly, they are principles and guidelines directed to the state, to EMBs themselves, to digital companies, to the regulatory bodies, political parties, civil society organizations, media, and interestingly, traditional institutions, which are often left out in this space. There are principles and guidelines speaking to that constituency. And harvesting from those principles and guidelines, the Electoral Commission itself is now in the process of amending the Electoral Code of Conduct. Our Code of Conduct is about 27 years old, and it speaks nothing about social media and what have you. So we are running against time to find this amended together with the protection of journalists, access to information, to enhance access to information, to bolster freedom of expression. We want that included in the Code of Conduct before the 2026 local government elections. So we're hoping that all things going well, we should be able, we have a little bit more time, but again, it depends on how quick the legislators can do this, but that's part of the work that we're doing.
From our side, I wanted to say, you will need a targeted approach, in the sense that when you look during COVID, you had the experts of that group that will always dispel any myth through the press conferences and everything. And a good thing in the media, you have the newspapers and others having fact checkers to verify, and the radio stations to verify facts and say this is correct. And it requires resources and support for such research and whatever. But from our side, we believe that one of the recommendations we make around digital media literacy is that if you observe what has happened globally, you have regulators accounting to Parliament on a 6-monthly and a yearly basis in terms of how they have dealt with misinformation and disinformation, so that you track progress that you are making as a country from a regulatory perspective and from the operator's perspective. And you also have these digital platforms reporting on a 6-monthly and an annual basis to say this is how we have contributed to the lessening of misinformation and disinformation. So I guess maybe as a policymaker, one understands why you need to have proper frameworks, because when they take you to court, if they were to take, they'll say, what instrument are you using to have oversight over us? Then when you have that legislative framework, at least you are able to give the regulator the powers to have oversight. And what instruments are you using? But we are saying for this to work, you don't have to do hardcore regulation. Co-regulatory measures will work where they will develop their own code of conduct, and if it's not working, then you give your regulator a backstop power to say you are just going to be on top of them to implement. But I think what we have observed is that digital media literacy is going to play a very key role, but you have to have somebody who reports on a 6-monthly and an annual basis, and you also have to track progress. Thanks.
Victor, if I recall, the new audiovisual bill does have an element around digital media literacy built into it at the end. I can't remember whether or not it's meant to be built in at basic education level, or it's meant to be at what level of education. Can you recall?
Our understanding is that it has to start at the basic education, because you remember it's a new thing, but the misinformation and whatever does not only affect children, it also affects elders and everyone. But I think for it to be structured and to be part of the curriculum, I think that's why you don't take decisions at the beginning. For it to be effective, you need to include basic education at the beginning, so that when they do their curriculum, they know that one of the skills required for the digital environment is digital media literacy skills. And that's why the collaboration is very important. So it will start at the basic level, going to the higher education and to the general public in terms of to deal with climate issues and other issues that are challenging them. Yes, thank you.
All right, so we're going to wrap up just with maybe 1 minute each as a final thought. If you have any final comments, I think we've covered an extensive amount of information this morning, which speaks about the context of your organizations and the range of collaborations that you have and the work that you are doing. But just a final word then I will start with the CGE, Commissioner Leonasia Leanne van der Merwe. Final word.
Good morning again, facilitator. Thank you very much to the South African Human Rights Commission for granting us this platform to be able to speak on gender ideology and the impact that it has at a community level. I think we need to also, since in the context of gender identity, gender ideology, I can't describe this body of work as new work, but I think that we have to explore more innovative ways and also legislative ways of responding to some of these issues. In the case of Lagadi, that is certainly where we are going. But I think, for example, AI is not just about extracting. I do think that we can use AI as an innovation to respond to misinformation and disinformation. So with those thoughts, allow me to thank yourself and the Human Rights Commission for granting me this platform.
Sibongile, are you online? And can we have your final thoughts?
Yes, I am, and my apologies about the technical challenges. I just want to add that we've recently hosted a civil society engagement that was led by our National Director, Advocate Shamila Batoyi. This was done alongside our senior management, and this engagement formed part of our broader commitment to building public trust. And through these partnerships, we are sharing information about our work and listening to concerns, especially those related to disinformation and misinformation. This civil society organization play a crucial role in our public education campaign and also help us to monitor narratives and helping to ensure that accurate information reaches communities despite the misinformation trends that are currently out there on social media about the NPA. These engagements are ongoing, and we are also exploring ways to deepen our collaboration, especially in areas like public education campaigns and countering harmful misinformation online. So this is an ongoing work for the NPA. And we are also looking to collaborate with the broader justice cluster. And thank you, colleagues, for a robust discussion on this matter. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And then lastly, Colin and Victor.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think for us, really, I think elections have too many dependencies, and collaboration with all actors is quite important. Tsidi was talking about the impact of the juniorization of the newsroom. I personally feel like if we can also, I think, have the media able to play its role, the duty to inform, it becomes like our frontline defense, as it were, for mitigating disinformation. So one of the challenges, I mean, the commission usually holds press briefings for all our media houses. But one of the challenges is that then often the people who attend these meetings are almost junior, and often, we hold a conference, give all the vital information, statistics, and you'll have a room more than this full of journalists. None of them will ask you a question for clarity or anything regarding what you presented. They will ask us, if it was today, they will ask us about the Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi thing or MK or something else. So at the end of the day, an opportunity is lost, because then you are not sure whether they even understood what you are presenting, whether they are taking that information away. So I think that's just one of the challenges that we have, I think, in as far as the collaborations and making sure that what we discuss with the media houses at senior level also trickles down to. So I think maybe it's the issue that, for instance, Sidi was talking about, that maybe the turnover in the media sector makes it difficult. Not that it's their own fault also. There are many challenges, I think, that impact the media at this point. But we believe that they become a first line of defense. We give them as much information as possible so that when frivolous accusations are made to tarnish the integrity of the elections, they are the first one to call out, or as I had yesterday, call in the people who make these assertions. Thank you, Chair.
From my side, I'm just still 30 seconds to say, the other work that we do is around the upcoming AI policy, where in line with the uses and other processes, I think we'll appreciate comments when it's out for public comments, where people are going to say, how do we deal with these digital platforms using algorithms to push certain things out and certain misinformation and disinformation, and also how do we deal with the artificial intelligence related to deep fakes and other issues that it was raised, to say what should be the collaborate. And then I think the human rights perspective will come from fact checkers, researchers, and people that are operating on the ground to inform our policy. And that's what we appreciate: well-researched, informed, evidence-based policy. Thank you.
And I think that's a fantastic way to finish up our session. Thank you very much to all the participants concerned. We'll now break for tea, and when we come back, we will have the African Commission on the ACHPR, the African Commission on what? Human and People's Rights. Sorry, there we go. Human and People's Rights and the Special Rapporteur. Okay, at 10 past 11. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. We will reconvene. Can I just check if the colleagues from the ACHPR, they are online. Commissioner,
Morning, how are you?
good morning to you and your colleagues. My name is Tsepo Madlingozi. I'm one of the commissioners at the South African Human Rights Commission. It's my honor to introduce you and your team. So we are pleased and honored to have the presence of Honorable Commissioner Ovena Geresha Tobzi Sono, who is, as you can see from the program, is our African rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information, which is part of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Commissioner is indeed a legal expert with extensive background in advising ministries and also drafting legislation. Commissioner is currently a senior advisor for Parliament in the Office of the Attorney General in Mauritius. Commissioner, once again, thank you so much for making time. Indeed, the issues that we've been speaking about from yesterday are not only transnational, but also they're very pervasive on our continent. So we look forward to hearing how the African Commission is dealing with this matter. How are you as a rapporteur? What has been your experience going to different countries? But also, what are some of the resolutions and principles that your office is crafting? We've given you about an hour. I know you are with your colleagues there, so you will introduce your colleagues, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to open the camera. It's not allowing me. Probably it's on your side.
Just try again, Commissioner.
Yes, I'm just trying. No, it's not allowing me to open the camera.
Okay, but I can confirm that we can hear you loud
and
fine, clear.
Fine,
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. So, I'm Geresha Tobzi Sono. I'm Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression and Access to Information with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So today we'll be talking about digital rights instruments that the Commission has recently adopted. So, Guy, can we have the first slide?
Good morning, Commissioner. I think the SAHRC should have the slides on their side. If not, I could show. Perhaps we could just hear from the colleagues at SAHRC if they are going to show us the slides.
Just give us 1 second, Commissioner. We're just uploading the slides, but maybe you can start with some basic introduction to the African Commission. I know in South Africa people... Oh, there are the slides. Excellent. Can you see them from your side?
Yes, I can see them.
Thank you so much.
So we can go to the next slide.
Next slide, colleagues.
Yes. So next one, please. So I come from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I don't know, I'm sure all of you have heard of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is there to promote and protect human rights in Africa. It's part of the EU, and it is the human rights organ of the EU. And I am the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa. At the Commission, you have other special rapporteurs, namely that on the rights of women, for protection for all those in prison and and so on. So I am today, what I'm be talking about is in fact digital rights and access, freedom of expression and access to information. So what we already have in existence, next slide please. Yeah, next one. Yes, what we already have at the Commission at the moment is the model law on access to information in Africa, which was developed as far back as 2013. We also have guidelines on access to information and elections in Africa, which was developed by the Commission in 2017. We also have a Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa, which dates back to 2019. However, recently, as far back as December of the year before, we've had the Commission, and my special mandate has passed Resolution 620 on access to data, next slide, and Resolution 630 on information integrity, as well as Resolution 631 on public service content. All three resolutions can be accessed on the website of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So the Commission has mandated me to call for declarations on guidelines on these three resolutions. So this is why I'm here today, to try to see how you can help us in developing these guidelines for state parties. So we are, well, as for Resolution 620, next slide, we are being held, that is the African Commission, and my special mandate is being held by the African Alliance on Access to Data, for Resolution 630 for Media Monitoring Africa, as well as UNESCO, and Resolution 631, SOS Support Public Broadcasting Coalition. So, Guy, do you want to come in on 620 and talk a bit about the African Alliance on Access to Data?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the introduction. Dear colleagues, could we have the next slide? I'll quickly summarize some of the key points, and if you click again, you'll get the English. And again. So this resolution that the rapporteur championed at the ACHPR, it's really about getting access to data for African stakeholders. You may know that, of course, there is the right of access to information, but what does that mean? Access to data, statistics, data sets, and research findings. Everybody would know that the buzz today is AI, but AI, even without data, is meaningless. So it's a question of who owns the data, how do Africans get access to that data for development, democracy, accountability, transparency. So if we can go to the next slide. And if you click again, we'll get the French. Okay. So what's important about this resolution 620 is it says, as we know, access to information includes access to information held by the state, it's public information, but also it includes private actors, and this is now being applied to data as well. We know that the biggest data holders in Africa are the big tech companies, but also mining companies, marketing companies, transport companies, satellite companies, telcos, you name it. There's a huge amount of data there that, of course, must be privacy protected if it's going to be available in terms of people's privacy. The right to privacy should not be compromised. But at the same time, it's super important that this access is not locked up for private use, but it's actually made available as a common public resource. Next slide, please. This is also important. This resolution 620 says that there should be investments in African countries' data quality. We know there's a lot of rubbish in terms of what's out there on the internet, a lot of misinformation, hate speech, etc. So anybody who's going to use data needs to check quality. Data literacy is super important, and then capacity building programs. So if we go to the next slide, the resolution is a bit longer. I've just highlighted 3 points there on behalf of the Alliance for Access to Data. And this is the question, and perhaps we could just take a minute for just 2 comments. I know we pushed for time, and then we can pass the floor to a colleague to deal with the resolution 630. Are there any comments for this that the rapporteur should consider in terms of translating this resolution 620 into guidelines for African governments? Chair, perhaps you could just moderate if there's any indications. What are the we could get a key point from the audience. What should governments actually do to concretize this resolution 620?
Hi,
I
Guy.
don't
I'm
know.
just checking if there is any comment from the floor. Anyone want to make a specific comment in respect of this resolution? What we can do, Guy, is we are also inviting our NHRI partners through NUNRI, which we can then request that any comments in respect to these consultations can also be provided to us, where after we can furnish it to your offices formally as well. A last round of just an indication if anyone has a comment on this specific resolution in the room, online. Okay, Guy, I think we can perhaps move then to the next one with the open invitation that the comments or questions can also be posted in the chat box. Otherwise, we will be soliciting further comments through NUNRI as well, which we will be able to provide to your officers. We can proceed.
Super. Thank you. If we could go to the next slide, and then I will pass the floor. The next slide after this one. So this is, as the Commissioner said, this is the resolution being supported, consultation supported by Media Monitoring Africa and UNESCO. So Noor Ahmed, Noor, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Guy.
Okay. Over
Great.
to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Noor Ahmed. I am from the Communications Manager at Media Monitoring Africa. I won't introduce MMA because I know my colleague Thandi is at the summit and she spoke quite at length about our work already. Today, I'll just quickly focus on the Resolution 630 of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. If we can go to the second slide, please. So this specific resolution focuses on developing guidelines for states to monitor technology companies in respect of their duty to maintain information integrity through independent fact-checking. And it's a very bold and timely response to growing threats to information integrity and digital rights globally. The next slide, please. This Resolution 630 specifically notes with deep concern the recent regress by tech companies with regards to information integrity and online protection of expression and access to information. And what the resolution does is that it acknowledges that platforms are not doing enough, and in some cases they are actually pulling back from efforts to protect users in Africa, such as the case with Facebook getting rid of their fact-checking program and instead introducing community notes, which is a format that we've all seen with platforms such as X. It's not independent or objective, and it does not fully work. We know that global tech companies often reduce resources for the African region, whether it's fewer staff, inadequate moderation in African languages, or slower responses to online harms. So some of the key demands of the resolution are essentially that the content moderation systems for tech platforms fully cover African languages, that they have sufficient human oversight and not just automated systems, and that they ensure that AI tools are properly trained to work effectively in our specific linguistic and cultural context. Specifically, when it comes to Francophone or Lancophone regions, these are very basic, reasonable, and long overdue demands. If we can have the next slide, please. Resolution 630 also stresses something which is very critical, and that is the importance of comprehensive African access to the data held by tech companies on par with the higher standards in other regions, which is essential for knowledge about systemic risks to information integrity. In other words, Africa should have the same level of platform transparency and data access as Europe and North America do. Without this, we're fighting blindfolded, and we need that data to truly understand how these platforms are shaping our information spaces. If we can have the next slide, please. So essentially, as part of Resolution 630, the Special Rapporteur has been tasked with developing guidelines for states and platforms and other actors, and MMA is honored to coordinate the consultation process on behalf of the Special Rapporteur. And these consultation processes will feed into these guidelines that will be developed. We are essentially asking stakeholders the key question of what should the guidelines propose to governments to enable effective monitoring of platform performance on information integrity. If there are any comments in the room around this, or even in the chats, we will take note of them, and they will form part of the broader consultation process and essentially will feed into the final guidelines that are developed. So it's a critical opportunity for everyone to help design practical rights-based recommendations around this. That's it from my input, unless there are any comments or questions.
Thank you, Noah. I'm just checking there's one comment in the room here. Again, I'm inviting our NHRI partners in Africa also to post their comments. Alternatively, I've already indicated we will be sourcing comments on these resolutions through NUNRI afterwards, but let me take this one question in the room.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Good morning, this is John Leroux from Graphica. It's just a quick question on the previous slide. There was mention made that artificial intelligence should be used alongside human oversight and human assistance to assess platforms and the content that gets posted on those platforms in order to shore up information integrity. I think the question that I've got is around low resource languages, specifically ones that in South Africa, for example, we've got a myriad, we've got like 11 official languages, and not all of them are equally online, so to speak. But is there any plans and or proposals towards government to ensure that those low resource languages fall into this? That we've got, instead of the usual English and Afrikaans, the Zulu and the Xhosa, which are big and online languages, but to also have smaller ones in there that can form part of this type of monitoring and assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yes, I think that one of the main things that this resolution wants is to give, as you said, low resource languages the opportunities to form part of this process. So the guidelines do intend to cover the issues of African languages. We've got 13 official languages in South Africa, and that does not even, scrape the barrel when it comes to all of the different languages that exist on the African continent. So there is definitely a hope that the guidelines will compile a plan for governments to then start holding tech platforms accountable and ensure that tech platforms take these low resource languages and keep them in mind as well when it comes to moderation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nora. I think we just missed that last one sentence. Perhaps
If
you
not,
can...
then that's it from my side, and I can pass off to Uyanda, who will be presenting on 631 next.
Hi, Noor. Are you
Thank you
able?
very much, Noor. Good morning to everyone. My name is Uyanda Siotula from the SOS Support Public Broadcasting Coalition, and I am going to be speaking to Resolution 631. And just a brief introduction on who we are as SOS Coalition. We are a civil society organization that advocates for, a strengthened and, effective public broadcaster in South Africa, which is the SABC. And one of the reasons why, our work revolves around the SABC is because, of, the value the SABC holds in advancing access to information for the marginalized and the poor. So, our work has really been always inspired by, the right to access information as well as freedom of expression. So, which is why we were, fitting to, really, drive, the consultations for Resolution 631, which, broadly looks at, access to information. So to be specific, Resolution 631 is working towards, if I could please just have the slides as well. I can't see them on my side. If we could please have them on the screen. It should be in the same document that was shared previously, just at the bottom.
We are on it.
So
You
in
can
the
just give us a
meantime, I
second.
will carry on. Oh yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. So Resolution 631 is working towards the assessment of public interest content in this digital era and developing guidelines to ensure a public interest element for all platforms operating, in Africa. So we know that, digital platforms, as great as they are in ensuring that everybody has got access to information, they do have a negative, side to them, which is obviously, mis and disinformation and, online harms. However, what we are trying to advance through this resolution is information that, is ensuring that there is a public interest element so that information that people receive, is able to educate, inform, and entertain, rather than, mislead and cause harm. So, so if we can go to the next slide, please. And just another click for English. Yes, perfect. So Resolution 631 is concerned with safeguarding and supporting universal access to quality public interest content, as a pillar to actualizing the right to access information. Because, digital platforms have actually redefined universality as we know it through traditional broadcasting, radio, and television. So, it does allow for people to universally, across, various countries and continents to have access to information, and what that does is that it allows people to, be exposed to various types of information. However, what we're trying to do here through Resolution 631 is to understand or to ensure that the type of access, the type of information people have access to actually falls within the bounds of information integrity. It is not information that is misleading. If we could please move to the next slide. So what we are also concerned about is, if you look at, the traditional production of information, especially public service content, which was traditionally produced and distributed by, public broadcasters, which we now refer to as public service media organization. What we're trying to also understand is that role of, producing and distributing public service information really still the role that should be played by, public broadcasters? Because if you look at the digital transformation, we've got very, players, we've got many players that actually nowadays have got access to, the production, means. We've got social media platforms where you've got, influencers, we've got content creators that are actually producing content, that could qualify as public service, content. So should we then be looking at ways to expand and formalize that, production of content beyond what we know public service broadcasters to have been producing previously. So I think really this resolution is looking at democratizing the production, the distribution, and the accessibility means to information, that is considered public content, public service content information, which was traditionally the role of public broadcasters. But obviously we know that in the digital era, public broadcasters do not have the digital footprint that other players have, and it then makes it impossible to counter mis and disinformation without access to this very important content that could actually be an antidote to this very problematic mis and disinformation. And I think it's important to also clarify that public service content is not looking to replace, the role of public broadcasters, because, traditionally they still, play quite an important role, especially for those that do not have access to the digital space. However, the issue is in the digital space. How do we make sure that that content continues to be produced and accessible, given that public broadcasters do not have this digital footprint? So it's basically just expanding the barriers of entry, barriers to production and access to this type of content. Okay, and then the next slide, please. If you could go to the next one as well. So really we're looking at developing guidelines that could then inform member states, to develop future-oriented policy that is needed to ensure, universal access to public service content in their respective countries. And really the question that we are asking, next slide, please. Really the question that we are asking for this particular resolution is what role should, what should the guidelines propose to government in order to get public service content on all platforms in Africa? Should we be thinking about incentive schemes that government should be looking into to ensure that, the new players, the influencers, the content creators are incentivized to produce this type of content? Should we be looking at legislation? Should we be thinking about, mass carry obligations to ensure that digital platforms, have an obligation to carry and promote this particular content? I will leave it at that, and just see if there is any input from the floor, and if there isn't any, we're happy to receive input at a later stage.
Thank you so much. If I can just have a look in the room for any input on this resolution. We've got comments from this side.
All right, thank you. I will hand back to the Special Rapporteur.
Hello. Hi, so I'd like to ask a question in relation to Resolution 620 and its connection to Resolution 631.
The Special Rapporteur has left. I think Guy will be facilitating the discussions after this.
Oh, thank you, Noor. Guy, I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Yes, the Rapporteur sends apologies. She had to go to another commitment. If we could come back to the slides, we just wrap up now. So essentially there's a timeline, and then you will see a QR code, and the timeline is to tell you what we're looking at in terms of phases. As I said previously, basically these three organizations are helping the Rapporteur with the consultations. So at this stage we're in phase one, looking at the principles and key points for the guidelines. Then once we've canvassed as many people as possible, we'll move to the draft text, and then the Rapporteur will finalize, as is her due. I mean, we're just playing at an advisory role here in terms of organizing consultations and giving the feedback back to her. She will then finalize it, and then she'll present it to the ACHPR. So we hope that this would be next year, to start at least with 620, if not the other two resolutions. And the big question is, what can the National Human Rights Institutes in Africa contribute These are very comprehensive digital resolutions, to make them more than just resolutions, to give them some kind of practical, concrete implication that stakeholders can refer to. These guidelines are going to be super important. And so we really do encourage you to contribute. And if we go to the next slide, you will see a QR code here. And if you could just click one more time. There you go. There's the actual resolution itself, not the resolution, the link to where you can make sort of more formal input. It would be super valuable to get the expertise and the insight of the human rights institutes and your networks on these three very important questions. Just to finalize, as you can see, these are all complementary. The first one is getting access to data as part of the right to information. The second one is information integrity, which again links with the right to the actual right to information. And there is also what's important is not necessarily controlling speech, but actually trying to monitor so that these platforms realize that they're being watched in terms of what kind of content moderation they do in the different languages. And then the third resolution, 631, is about not just getting access to data, not just monitoring whether there is some moderation there, but there's also the question then of whether there's going to be some kind of alternative. And the alternative could be, public interest content on Netflix, public interest content on TikTok, public interest content on YouTube, public interest content on all manner of platforms. And indeed to encourage those state-owned broadcasters that are going online to increase their public interest content. So please, if I can pass back then and really encourage you there to look at this link and to look at or to take a picture of the QR code, follow through. You'll see there's questions on each of the three resolutions. So on behalf of the rapporteur and the two sister organizations that are doing the consultations, we want to thank you, SAHRC, South African Human Rights Commission, and all the participants for joining us in this. And I hope this alerted you to two really important, potentially very influential things that are happening at the Pan-African point of view, continental point of view, which is super important because no single African country can deal with these issues alone. So I'll pass back to the Commissioner or to Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter.
Are we on? Thank you so much, Guy, and colleagues, and to Commissioner as well, for this very insightful presentation. It certainly takes us to what is in the process of being developed as a continent, and where our voices as national human rights institutions certainly becomes very critical. From our side and a commitment from the Commission's side, we would certainly like to formally submit our comments, as we have previously done with resolutions from the African Commission on Human People's Rights, as we have done with UNESCO as well as other documents. We would be submitting our formal comments, and this consultation was very valuable for us to better understand the context. We will also be, from our side, requesting through our network and the leadership of NUNRI, comments from our partners on the continent to reflect on these resolutions. And a lot of the questions that you have posed here this morning, Commissioner Guy, as well as the colleagues who will be working on these resolutions, we have ventilated. And perhaps we don't have the answers right now in the room, but it's certainly something that we need to reflect on. And again, from a human rights foundational approach, it is something that we would like to comment on, because even our government stakeholders this morning indicated that no regulation, and I'm going to put it in inverted commas because regulation is a is a very contemptuous word in this atmosphere, that nothing can take place without it being reflected from a human rights-based perspective. So we will be commenting, we will be circulating a request for comment through the leadership of our NANRI partners, and we have also noted that the chairing organization and institution from the Digital Rights Alliance, the Danish Human Rights Institute, is also online, and perhaps we will also then request our partners through the Digital Rights Alliance to provide comments on these resolutions. So we do thank you for the leadership and the work that you are doing in this ever-developing discourse, and certainly something that the African voices need to become very loud and clear on about. So I'm going to once, and perhaps as a last request, see if there's any comments. Sukiso, you will indicate to me if there's any comments on the chat, or whether we will then resolve to circulate questions and comments through our partnerships. Perfect. We have resolved to do that as well in the room and circulate requests and comments in the, through our partnerships as indicated. And then it looks like we are moving towards closure of this 1.5-day summit, where we truly reflected on a lot of commitments, on a lot of information, but also a lot of questions that I don't necessarily have the answers for. It's igniting a debate, and it's igniting perhaps a call to action, not to sound, you know, too copy and pasty of what the other colleagues have also said, but it's certainly because of the developing nature of this discourse, asking us to reflect. Now, in doing so, and in wrapping up this 2-day discussion, I'm going to ask Professor Tsepo Madlingozi to come to the platform and give us the closing reflections from the Human Rights Commission side, and then thanking our partners here today in the room, yesterday in the room, and then online and on the YouTube channel for their contribution in making this a truly rich and enlightening discussion. We even reflected this morning with the leadership of the South African Human Rights Commission, the acting CEO, who is currently in a discussion with the Deputy Minister on some of the discussions we had yesterday. So this is an active platform, and we commit ourselves not to let it die at being a talk shop. And I hope that you have seen from the Human Rights Commission's actions as well that we will not allow that to happen. Prof. Madlingozi, thank you so much for your leadership as well. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Can we give Dr. Carter and the team a handover, please? Colleagues, as the South African Human Rights Commission, last year we set up a new unit. The unit is called Human Rights and Developing Technologies. It's a unit headed by Dr. Carter. And really, the rationale behind setting up that unit is to say that we are confronted with so many issues to do with online hate, to do with disinformation and misinformation. So it's a unit. I don't think it's a unit yet. It's got one person so far, to be honest. But it's our commitment to learning. It's our commitment to collaboration. It's our commitment to intervening in this space in a focused way. As I said, we are inundated with these issues, and we really don't know what to do. It was interesting yesterday that the chairperson of the commission started by talking about the continuities from apartheid to post-apartheid. And it was also really interesting to hear from the panel later, earlier on, or even now online, about how tech companies have regressed in terms of information integrity. In fact, some people talk about digital colonization, a word that has not come up in this forum. How do we deal with digital colonization? If you go back, those of you who know your Frantz Fanon, let me see if anyone knows Frantz Fanon here. Franz Fanon opens the Record of the Earth with a line that colonialism is a lie, and we answer that lie with our own lie. That is to say that colonialism and neocolonialism are built on foundational propaganda, on foundational disinformation. Disinformation is at the heart of colonialism. You know, the lie, the epistemic lie, I think, therefore I am. Yes? Who said that? Hey, yeah, but here it's a sea, it's a dark city here. I think, therefore I am. They don't think, and therefore they are not. And that is the whole basis of colonialism. They don't think, therefore they are not. They are not rational human beings. Therefore, their land is terra nullis. Terra nullis doesn't mean land that is not, that is empty. That is a misreading. Terra nullis means nobody's land, because they are nobody. When you come to their land, you see fauna, animals, and you see them. They are part of this. They are nobodies. They are not human beings. That is the foundation of colonialism. They don't think. They are not rational beings. Therefore, they are nobody. Therefore, we can take their land. We can subjugate them economically. We can subjugate them also in terms of culture and epistemology and religion. And therefore, some of us are always asking, when we fight disinformation, are we not locked within the episteme of Eurocentrism, you know? So some of us are fighting disinformation, but still locked within the episteme of Europe. So we are playing within the terms and the reference set by Europe. In fact, we are asking, how do we get included within that episode? That's not how you fight disinformation. Disinformation, as a 2015 student said, must be decolonial. Where are we with that framework? Where are we with the decolonial framework? And from there, the other question, can we fight disinformation within the framework of racial capitalism, within the framework of neoliberalism? How do we do that? You know, you look at the guidelines proposed by the African Commission. Do they disrupt the material foundation of the big tech industries, the flow of information, the digital colonization? So are we disrupting when we are fighting disinformation, or are we asking to be assimilated within not only the episteme, but the material conditions of disinformation? I don't know where I started there. You can see that I miss being a teacher, so let me not go there. I won't summarize the deliberation, but safe to say that the last panel was really important, the collaboration, the need to collaborate. The Human Rights Commission cannot do this alone. ICASA cannot do this alone. The South African Press Council cannot do this alone. IEC. In fact, I will go as far as to say all of us have been victims of disinformation. The South African Press Council, you know, if you look at them, people say, you guys are biased, you know, against this or that. You know, the IEC, also disinformation. The NPA, ICASA, all of us have been victims of disinformation. The academia, my goodness, you know, also victims of disinformation. So there's a need to collaborate. There's a need for us to push the state on policy framework. But in doing so, we need to be consistent. We need to be consistent. We need to be consistent. We need to be neutral. We need to be objective. We can't be seen to be biting, you know, when it comes to certain people and keeping quiet with certain people. The IEC said that, you know, contestation is going to be the nature of politics going forward. So the environment is murky. It's so murky. Just the events of last week with the General Mokwanas. The landscape is dirty. You must even be careful what you say, because you don't know who's a villain and who is a hero. Sometimes heroes are villains and villains are heroes, or both. So the, you know, system is murky. But as we say, the South African Human Rights Commission, we put together this summit with two objectives. One, to reach a consensus that disinformation is a threat to human rights? Can we have that consensus as a declaration of this summit, that disinformation is not simply a matter of access to technology, a matter of data, a matter of miscommunication? It is a human rights threat. It is a grave human rights threat that impinges on the whole gamut of human rights. So that is the one objective of that summit. The second objective was to hear from different actors. What has been your experiences and how can we collaborate? What has been your experiences and how can we collaborate? And we take seriously the call by ICASA that the Human Rights Commission, CGE, and others must be part of some of this platform. We have engaged with the IEC. In fact, last year here at Nelson Mandela University, at the Nelson Mandela University, we released a call just before the elections about the need for the elections to be free and fair, and how people, should communicate online. The Media Monitoring Africa, we've collaborated successfully. In fact, the tweet by Operation Dudula, we acted immediately. We put the Commissioner of Police on terms to say, the Human Rights Commission, we have seen this tweet, we are bringing it to your attention, and if you don't do anything, we'll hold you accountable, right? And they acted immediately. They arrested the person immediately. Not arrested, they brought him for questioning. And of course, everything, went. So those kind of early warning mechanisms, early warning and early acting become very, very, very important. So I want to close by saying it is my assessment that we have achieved those two objectives. We have made the call that disinformation is not simply Chris Excel making fun, having fun online. We know that he monetizes these things. We know that he does the work of information launderers, as someone was saying, right? We know that, and therefore it's not only trolling, it's not just trolling, it's more than that. It's more than that. It's more than that. It distorts perception. Who was saying this? Weaponizing narratives. It weaponizes narratives. And it really damages the very essence of democracy. Democracy is built on transparency. Democracy is built on accountability. Democracy is built on free flow of information. We don't have to agree, but information must flow. Tomorrow, the European Court of Human Rights at 10 o'clock will be issuing the judgment on the Caster Semenya matter. It will be online. You can follow the European Court on Human Rights. As the South African Human Rights Commission, we intervened as a party to that commission on the rights of intersex people. Not only because it's a global South, global North war, but also as a means of pedagogy to educate people about what is intersex and so forth. Gender dynamics, always talking about the not only people not understanding gender and sexuality and sexual orientation, but deliberately, defaming people and deliberately distorting, the essence of human beings, who they are, and so forth. So I'm just saying that case is important pedagogically to stand in solidarity with marginalized people who are often defamed, the Caster Semenya matter. Tomorrow, coincidentally, we'll also be meeting with the Department of Health on our intersex pamphlet. It's called A Guide for Parents and Guardians of Intersex Children. It's a guide that we have created as the South African Human Rights Commission for parents and guardians, because often what happens is that when the child is born intersex, they are forced into agreeing to surgery that cannot be reversed later on. We call it mutilation, actually. That cannot be reversed later on. So it's a guide to say to parents, one, what is intersex? Two, when you make decisions, we don't say you should not make a decision, but it must be informed. So it was really good to hear from the IEC, from ICASA, from everyone to say, we also have these guidelines to counter misinformation, but also to guide people. Let's say some people don't know, they need to be guided. So, colleagues, within the next couple of weeks, this was the start of our collaboration. So we will be reaching out for bilaterals, one-on-one meetings with Gender Dynamics, with ICASA, with IEC, Press Council, Code SA, and everyone, to see how do we collaborate. But then later on, we'll also be announcing other measures that we'll be taking. So, colleagues, thank you so much for spending time in this beautiful city. We thought we'll release you earlier so that you can take a walk to the promenades if you want, just to get fresh air. But thank you so much, Dr. Carter. Thank you so much to the provincial team for supporting this work. We also want to thank the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, our partners within the continent, and our partners in South Africa. Colleagues, if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.